The first time Lucas picked up someone who wasn't really alive, he didn't notice anything different at all. It was just another night on the highway. Just another stretch of asphalt that looked like every other stretch he had crossed for years. The same dull glow of the dashboard. The same humming of old country songs coming out of the radio. The same line of white stripes in front of his headlights pulling him forward like a rope. The road was mostly empty. The kind of emptiness that makes you feel like the world shrank and left only you, your truck, and whatever is hiding in the dark beyond the beams. He had just passed a small town, 2 gas stations facing each other, a diner, a motel with a flickering sign, and the lights were fading in his rear view when he saw the woman on the side of the road, standing near the guardrail. She was holding a small bag and had one arm raised, thumb stretched out, the universal sign that says, "I need a ride," in any language, any country. Lucas didn't even think about it. He slowed down, checked the mirrors, shifted down, and stopped the truck a little ahead of her so she'd have to walk to the door. Old reflex. His father used to say you don't leave people stranded at night on a highway, because tonight it might be them, but tomorrow it could be you. Lucas leaned over, opened the passenger door, and the interior light blinked on. The woman climbed in with a quiet, hesitant movement. She was in her late 30s maybe, wearing a faded dress and a light jacket that looked too thin for the chill outside. Long dark hair pulled back in a messy knot, tired eyes, the kind that had already seen too much. She smelled faintly of cold air and something like wet earth. "Good evening," she said, voice soft, almost swallowed by the rumble of the engine. "Thank you for stopping." "No problem," Lucas answered, putting the truck back in gear. "Where are you headed?" "There's a town a bit further ahead," she said. "Just leave me near the cemetery. I'll walk from there." That should have been the first thing to strike him as strange. People asked for the bus station, the gas station, the center of town, their street, not the cemetery. But he was tired, and the night had its own logic, and sometimes folks were just weird. He shrugged it off. "Sure," he said. "Hop in, buckle up, it's not far." She smiled in a polite way, not really happy, just grateful, and pulled the seatbelt across her chest. The radio crackled with some old song about lost loves and dirt roads. Lucas kept his eyes on the highway while they rolled forward, the truck's headlights cutting tunnels of pale light through the dark. For a while they didn't speak. Lucas was used to that. Some people chatter, some people sit in silence. It's easier to let them decide. After a few minutes, though, he glanced her way. "You coming from work this late?" he asked. "Kind of," she replied. "I was visiting. I stayed longer than I planned." He nodded. "Family." You could say that. Her answer didn't really explain anything, but she didn't look like she wanted to share more, so he didn't push. They passed a small sign announcing the next town. The wind brushed against the windshield, carrying the smell of distant fields, burnt grass, and something metallic from the truck's own engine. "You drive at night a lot?" she asked suddenly. "Mostly," he said. "Less traffic, roads are emptier, and it's when the freight needs to arrive. People like waking up and finding everything ready on the shelves, you know. They don't think about who brought it." "You must see a lot of things," she murmured, watching the dark fields slide past her window. "More than I care to remember," he said with a low laugh. "Lots of roadkill, lots of drunk people doing stupid things, a couple of fights at roadside bars, that kind of thing." "Accidents?" she asked quietly. Lucas's fingers tightened on the steering wheel for a second. "Yeah," he said. "Too many." The silence that followed felt heavier. The woman's gaze stayed fixed on the road stretching ahead, but Lucas had the impression she wasn't really looking at it. She was staring through it, into something that didn't belong to that truck, that night, or that part of the world. "Sometimes," she said, "people don't know they're dead right away." Lucas frowned. "What?" "I mean when accidents happen," she added, as if realizing how strange her own words sounded. "Sometimes they're so sudden that the person just keeps walking. They don't accept it. They try to go home. They try to talk to someone passing by. They don't understand why nobody answers." The hairs on Lucas's arms rose just a little, like a breeze had slipped through the closed windows. The truck's heater was on, the air inside warm, but he felt something cool moving around his neck and settling down his spine. He gave another low laugh, trying to push the feeling away. "You talk like you've seen that yourself," he said. "You could say that," she repeated. Her voice was soft, almost lost in the engine noise. They fell quiet again. The exit for the town came into view, a faded sign with missing letters, pointing toward a curved ramp and a couple of yellow lights in the distance. Lucas flipped on his turn signal and guided the truck onto the ramp. The town at night looked like so many others. A main road with a few street lamps, closed shops, shutters pulled down, doors locked, a few houses with one window lit by a blue TV glow. He knew the route. He'd been there before. The cemetery sat on a small hill at the edge of town, surrounded by a low wall and iron gate. "You sure you want me to drop you there?" he asked, more out of courtesy than anything. "This late?" "It's fine," she said. "I know the way." As they approached the hill, Lucas saw the silhouette of the cemetery, rows of dark shapes, crosses and slabs, trees standing like watchmen. The iron gate at the front was closed, a padlock glinting faintly in the headlights. "Gate's locked," he said. "You want me to stop near the corner?" "Here is fine." She pulled the seatbelt loose, already reaching for the door handle. "Thank you, Lucas." He felt a jolt in his chest. "Did I tell you my name?" he asked. She smiled again, that same tired, polite smile. "You truckers always have your name on the door," she said, nodding toward the side mirror. "I saw it when I climbed in." Lucas blinked. Of course, white letters, Lucas R. painted near the company logo. He'd forgotten. "Right," he said, shaking it off. "Take care, ma'am." "Drive safe," she answered. She opened the door. The cold night air rolled into the cabin, bringing the smell of damp grass and something floral from the cemetery hill. She stepped down, closed the door gently, and walked toward the gate. Lucas didn't pull away right away. He watched through the windshield. The woman walked up to the gate like she knew every step. When she reached the padlocked iron bars, she didn't hesitate. She just kept walking, her form slipping between the bars as if they were made of smoke. 1 second she was there, solid and real. The next, she was on the other side of the gate, her back to him, moving into the shadows between the graves. Lucas's breath caught. His fingers, still wrapped around the steering wheel, went numb. He blinked hard, leaned forward, squinted. The gate was closed. The padlock was still there. Nobody else was on the other side. Nobody was anywhere. The small gravel road leading into the cemetery was empty, quiet. Just a line of stones and dirt stretched between tombstones and trees. "No," he whispered, as if arguing with his own eyes. "I'm tired. That's all. I'm seeing things." But the seat beside him still held the faint impression of someone's weight. The air still carried the scent of earth and damp fabric, fading slowly, like perfume after someone leaves a room. He let out a shaky breath, rubbed his face with one hand, and put the truck in motion. Work doesn't stop because you think you saw a ghost. Freight doesn't wait for hallucinations. He told himself that all the way out of town and back onto the highway, but every once in a while, his gaze slid back to the passenger seat, half expecting to see her sitting there, hands folded over that small bag, staring at the road she no longer needed. By the time the sky started paling behind the distant hills, he had convinced himself it was just exhaustion and imagination. Truckers tell each other stories all the time, at gas stations and coffee counters. Stories about strange things on the road, white-dressed women hitchhiking, kids asking for rides near bridges, men walking along the median who disappear when you blink. Maybe his brain had just borrowed someone else's legend and projected it into a real woman he'd picked up. Maybe he had dozed off for a second and dreamed the part with the gate. He didn't mention it to anyone. What could he say? "Hey, I might have given a ride to a ghost last night past the sugar." No, he kept it to himself. But that wasn't the last time. Not even close. The second time, it was a man in a suit, standing beneath a broken street lamp near a rest area entrance. He held a briefcase, shoes dusty, tie loose, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat, even though the air was cold. He waved as the truck approached, a stiff, almost desperate movement. Lucas hesitated. Something in him whispered, "Don't stop. Keep going." But he saw the man's face in the rear view as he passed, the kind of lost, hollow-eyed expression that said he'd run out of options hours ago. Lucas sighed, hit the brakes, and reversed gently until he was next to him. The man climbed in, murmured a quick, "Thank you," and sat rigid, staring straight ahead. His hands were pale around the handle of his briefcase. Lucas asked where he was going, and the man said the name of a city that was way further down the road than Lucas's route actually went. They settled on a drop-off point near a large junction. The whole ride, the man spoke in short, clipped sentences, saying he'd been traveling on business, trying to get home after a delay, his phone dead, his wallet missing. He spoke using the present tense, like it was happening right now, but something in the hollow way he said, "My wife is waiting," "And my little girl must be scared," made it sound like a line he'd repeated too many times. Lucas noticed small details. The dirt on the man's cuffs, as if he'd fallen to his knees in the middle of some field. The scuff on his cheek, like a bruise that didn't turn color. The way his eyes never quite focused on the dashboard or the windshield, as if he was looking a little past everything. When they reached the junction, the man asked to be dropped near an overpass. "I'll walk from here," he said. "It's not far." Lucas knew there was nothing but fields for a long stretch in that direction, then a bridge where too many cars had gone off the road over the years. "You sure?" he asked. "There's no town for miles down that way." The man offered a small, strained smile. "I know the way," he said. Lucas watched him climb out, briefcase in hand, and walk toward the overpass. Fog clung to the low ground, swirling around his legs. Just like with the woman, Lucas lingered a little, truck idling, watching. The man reached a point where the fog thickened, turning from a gray veil to a dense cloud. The briefcase seemed to vanish first, then his legs up to the knees, then his torso, and finally his head, swallowed up by the mist without any silhouette leaving it on the other side. The air inside the cabin grew heavy, pressing on Lucas's lungs. He strained his eyes, telling himself anyone walking into fog would disappear from sight. That was normal. He waited, expecting to see the man emerge a few meters later and continue along the roadside. Nobody did, not even a moving shadow. That was when things stopped being easy to ignore. After that, he started paying attention, looking a little longer at the faces of people he picked up, listening to the way they spoke about where they were going, about who they needed to see, and most of all, about what had happened to them. The more he listened, the more he realized something that made his stomach twist. Almost all of them mentioned some kind of accident, a bus that never made it to its destination, a car that skidded on wet asphalt, a bike that slid under a truck's wheels. They spoke about these events like distant memories, some with anger, some with confusion, some with a strange calm, like they had accepted something he couldn't see yet. A boy in a soccer jersey who sat in his passenger seat humming a tune said, "Mom kept yelling for me to wake up, but I was already standing outside the car and she wouldn't look at me." A middle-aged man with calloused hands and a smell of spilled gasoline said, "I tried to flag down so many cars, but nobody stopped. I saw them looking directly at me, and then past me like I was a shadow." A young woman with purple streaks in her hair whispered, "The water was so cold and so dark, and I kept thinking, I'll never see the shore again. And then suddenly I was standing on the shore, soaking wet, and my car was gone." Sometimes they asked him to drop them at impossible places. At the crossroads where they put the flowers after the truck turned over, near the old bridge that collapsed years ago, by the tree that looks torn open, out past the 3rd-kilometer marker. And every time, when he risked a longer stare in the mirror or through the side window as they walked away, something would give them away. The way they faded into fog, the way they slipped through gates or fences, the way a passing car's headlights went right through them without casting a shadow. It took him a while to admit it to himself, but eventually there was no more room to pretend. Something about his truck, his route, or maybe his own life, had turned him into a kind of ferryman for souls that hadn't fully moved on. At first, he tried to stop. He told himself he wouldn't pick anyone up anymore, no matter how desperate they looked. Let someone else carry that weight. But then came the night of the storm. The rain came down in thick sheets, hammering the windshield, turning the world into streaks of water and drowned headlights. He was driving carefully, hands tight on the wheel, wipers dragging back and forth in a rhythm that made his temples ache. There was a stretch of highway he hated, a narrow cut through a hill with a concrete wall on one side and a steep drop on the other. The drainage was terrible there. Water pooled easily, roar and splash rising with every car that passed. He took a deep breath when that stretch finally came and went, his shoulders relaxing just a little. That was when he saw the small figure standing on the shoulder of the road, rain drenching their clothes, arms wrapped around themselves. A kid. Even through the blurred glass, he saw it was a kid, no more than 8 or 9, alone. At that moment, every rule he'd tried to make for himself vanished. Whatever he had seen before, whatever he suspected about the strange passengers he'd been carrying, there was no way he was leaving a child out there in that storm. He turned on his hazard lights, slowed down, and pulled onto the shoulder, praying no other truck would come barreling up behind him. When he opened the passenger door, the kid was already there, small hands gripping the handle, hair plastered to their forehead. It was a boy, skinny, with a too large hoodie clinging to his small frame. Mud streaked his knees. His sneakers were soaked. "Get in," Lucas said, voice rough. "Hurry up, you're gonna freeze out there." The boy climbed in without a word and pulled the door shut. The interior light flashed on and off, catching his face for a moment. His eyes were big and dark, the kind kids have when they haven't yet learned how to hide anything. But there was something else in them, too. A depth that didn't belong in someone that young. "Seatbelt," Lucas said automatically, heart still pounding. The boy obeyed, fingers fumbling with the belt latch for a second before it clicked. Water dripped from his sleeves and the edge of his hoodie, leaving small dark spots on the seat. "Where are your parents?" Lucas asked. "Home," the boy answered quietly. "They don't know I'm here. You ran away." Lucas's jaw clenched. Memories of arguments, slammed doors, raised voices trembled at the edge of his mind, but he shoved them away. "Not now. It's late. Too late for you to be out here." "What happened?" The boy didn't answer right away. Lucas eased the truck back onto the road, eyes squinting against the curtain of rain. The tires pushed through puddles, sending up sprays of water. Inside the cabin, the air smelled of wet fabric and something else, something faintly familiar that Lucas couldn't place. "I was waiting," the boy finally said. "For you." The words crawled up Lucas's spine like an unexpected hand. "For me?" "Yeah." The boy turned his head slowly, studying Lucas's profile. "You always pass here. Same time, same truck, same songs." Lucas's hands tightened on the wheel. He had the sudden urge to turn off the radio, but the old song playing was almost comforting in its routine. "You couldn't know that," he muttered. "Maybe I just look like someone you know." "I know you," the boy said quietly. "You're Lucas." The first time someone else had said his name without being told, he'd had an excuse. The letters painted on the door. But this kid couldn't have read them in the storm, not standing behind the truck, not in that rain, not at that distance. "How do you know my name?" Lucas asked, trying to keep his voice firm. "Because I used to wait for you on the balcony," the boy said. "I counted how many trucks went by, and I knew which one was yours by the way the headlights looked in the curve." Lucas's heart skipped a beat. A faint, long-buried image surfaced. A small hand waving from above a doorway, a little boy in pajamas, jumping up and down, yelling, "Dad, I saw the truck! I saw it! I saw it!" He swallowed hard. "What's your name, kid?" he asked, though his chest already ached like he knew the answer. The boy looked back at the road, at the lines of water running down the windshield. When he spoke, his voice was softer, like he was afraid saying it out loud would break something. "My name is Daniel," he said. Lucas's grip on the steering wheel loosened, then tightened again. His lungs forgot how to pull air for a second. His vision blurred and then rushed into focus, the beams of the headlights slicing through rain like blades. He didn't need to ask. He didn't need a photo, an explanation, or a birth certificate. He knew. He knew the shape of that name in his mouth, the way it had echoed through the halls of a small apartment, the way it had been shouted in joy, in frustration, in fear. Daniel. His son's name. The son he hadn't seen in years. "That's not funny," Lucas said, but his voice came out hoarse and cracked. "Don't play with me, boy." "I'm not playing," Daniel said. "You asked my name. That's it." Lucas's throat burned. "There are a lot of kids named Daniel. You're not—" "You used to bring me toy trucks from the road," the boy said, cutting across him gently. "Little ones you bought at gas stations. You kept them hidden in the glove compartment until you got home, and Mom would pretend she didn't know you'd bought them. But you always left the receipts on the kitchen counter." Lucas's mouth opened. No sound came out. The road ahead narrowed to a tunnel of wet asphalt and white lines. "You snore when you fall asleep on the couch," Daniel continued quietly. "You say you don't, but you do. I used to sit on the floor and draw while you slept, and every once in a while your leg would jerk like you were hitting the brakes in a dream." Lucas's heart hammered so hard he could hear it in his ears. His hands were shaking and he had to fight not to let it show in the movement of the truck. "Stop," he whispered. "Stop it." "You're afraid of spiders," the boy added, a small hint of a smile in his voice now. "But you kill them anyway if Mom asks, then you pretend you're not grossed out." Lucas's chest caved in on itself. He hadn't told anyone that. He hadn't told anyone most of that. The last time he'd seen his son, the boy had been younger, smaller, still missing one of his front teeth. They'd been standing in a parking lot, voices echoing off concrete, anger stretching between them like a rope. His ex-wife had stood a few steps away, arms folded, mouth pressed tight. Lucas had shouted something he wished every day he could erase from existence. Then he'd gone back to the truck and done what he always did. He'd left. He hadn't come back, not properly, not the way a father should. Their contact faded into occasional calls, then messages, then silence. He threw himself into the road, into miles and miles of forgetting. "You can't be him," Lucas said, but it sounded more like he was begging than arguing. "You can't. You're older than he was when I last saw him." "Time doesn't work the same where I am," Daniel said simply. "Sometimes I feel small, sometimes I feel older, sometimes I feel like I've been waiting for you forever." Lucas swallowed hard. The wipers groaned across the glass, pushing sheets of water aside in a slow, endless rhythm. Where you are?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Where is that?" "In the places you drive past," Daniel said. "In the spots you don't look at. On the shoulders, in the ditches, between one town and the next, anywhere someone left and never arrived." The words wrapped around Lucas like a cold fog. He remembered every roadside cross he'd ignored, every bunch of wilted flowers tied to a guardrail, every piece of twisted metal that had once been a car, a bike, a truck. "No," he whispered. "No, that can't be where you are. You should be home. You should be with your mother." "Mom is home," Daniel said. "I'm not." Lucas's chest grew tight. What happened? The question hung there, heavy and inevitable, like a truck at the top of a slope with its brakes already burning. "You don't remember?" Daniel asked. Lucas flinched. "I remember hearing about something," he said. "Your mom called me." Her voice, it didn't sound real. She said there'd been an accident. She said The words tangled in his throat. He had never attended the funeral. He had been in the middle of a route, far from anywhere that mattered, and by the time he figured out how to get back, how to leave the truck, how to ask for time off, everything was already over. He told himself there was nothing left to see but a closed casket and people's tears, and he wasn't sure he deserved to stand among them. So he stayed on the road. He stayed where the sound of the engine could drown out the sound of his own regret. "I remember, but I never wanted to know too much," he said. "I kept telling myself that if I didn't picture it, it would hurt less. That if I just kept driving, I wouldn't have to think." "You didn't want to think," Daniel said calmly. "But I didn't have that choice. I was there the whole time. I still am, in a way." Lucas blinked. Rain streaked down the windshield. "Where?" he asked, his voice barely more than air. "Where were you?" "You know that curve with the broken guardrail and the long drop?" Daniel said. Lucas knew dozens of curves like that, places everyone whispered about at diners and gas stations, dangerous spots where bad things had happened and would keep happening. "Which one?" he asked. "The one where you always lift your foot a little off the gas without realizing," Daniel said. "Even when the road is dry, even when the weather is clear, your hands tighten on the wheel, and you don't know why. You just feel it." Lucas felt the blood drain from his face. He knew exactly which curve that was. It wasn't far. A few towns back, near a stretch of road where fog liked to cling to the low ground, and trees leaned too close to the asphalt. A simple bend, not too sharp, but with a drop that was unforgiving. There was a cross, nailed to a post there, white paint peeling off, plastic flowers faded by the sun. He had always avoided looking at it. "Don't," he whispered. "Don't say it was there." "It was there," Daniel replied softly. "The car didn't make the turn. Mom tried, she did, but the tires slid. Maybe oil on the road, maybe something else. It doesn't matter now. We left the road, and for a moment I saw the sky and the ground changing places over and over. Then everything went quiet." Lucas forced air into his lungs. He could almost hear the scream of metal twisting, the crack of glass breaking, the dull thud of something hitting earth. "Your mother," he said, barely able to speak. "Is she?" "She's alive," Daniel said. "She got hurt. Bad. But she's alive. At least she was when I last saw her." Relief and despair crashed into Lucas at the same time, knocking the air out of him. "And you?" he asked, even though the answer sat in the truck like a third presence, invisible but choking. "I didn't climb out of the car," Daniel said. "Not really, but I remember standing on the side of the road watching the lights. I tried to wave. I tried to call out. Nobody stopped." Lucas's hands shook. "I didn't know," he whispered. I never passed there that day. I was on a different route. I swear I didn't see you." "I know," Daniel said quietly. "It wasn't that night I was waiting for you. It was all the ones after." The truck's interior felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the space between them was filled with all the miles and lost chances that had piled up between their lives. "Why now?" Lucas asked, voice cracking. "Why appear to me now?" Why ride with me after all this time? Because you've been riding with all the others, Daniel said. You think I didn't notice? Every time someone else sat in this seat, every time you carried another soul that didn't belong to this world anymore, it got easier for me to find you. Easier to talk, easier to sit here. You opened a door you didn't know existed, and I walked through it. I didn't open anything, Lucas protested, though it sounded weak even to him. I just picked people up. That's what drivers do. We help. We get people from one place to another. You don't pick up just anyone, Daniel said. You pick up the ones that are stuck, the ones that can't finish their journey. You give them a last ride, even if you don't know it. You're not just delivering freight, Dad. You're delivering goodbyes. The word Dad hit him like a physical blow. He hadn't heard it directed at him in so long that it sounded foreign and sacred at the same time. Don't call me that, he said reflexively, pain twisting his voice. I wasn't there. I didn't. The sentences broke apart. You were my father whether you were there or not, Daniel said. That doesn't change just because you weren't in the car when it went off the road. Lucas gritted his teeth, the steering wheel biting into his palms. The truck's headlights sliced through the rain, illuminating empty stretches of road and occasional road signs that blurred by too fast to read. If what you're saying is true, he managed, if you really are my son and you've been stuck on that road all this time, why didn't you move on? Why are you wandering here getting into trucks like mine? Why are you here now with me? Daniel shifted in his seat, water still dripping from his sleeves, though somehow the truck's floor mat didn't look as soaked as it should. Because you never finished the trip, he said simply. You never came all the way back to where I was. You never stood on that curve and looked at what happened. You never said goodbye. So neither did I. The road hummed under the tires. The wipers scraped. The engine growled steadily. Outside, the storm raged and thinned by turns, sheets of rain becoming only scattered drops, then thickening again. That's not how it works, Lucas said, shaking his head. You don't just get released because someone shows up to stare at a pile of flowers and a broken guardrail. Maybe not for everyone, Daniel replied. But for us, it does. You're the one who opened the way. You're the one who's been driving lost souls around like freight that never got delivered. You made yourself into something you don't understand. You don't just carry their stories, Dad. You carry the weight that keeps them from disappearing. You've been a mirror for them, a last person to hear them. That matters. It matters more than you think. Lucas shook his head again, but it was slower this time, like the resistance was slipping. What do you want me to do? He asked quietly. Drive me back, Daniel said. To the curve, to the place where I left the road. It's not far for you. You've done longer detours for less. Drive me there, let me talk, let me finish, and then we'll see. See what? Lucas's voice trembled. If I can let go, Daniel said. And if you can. For a moment, the thought of changing his route, of turning the truck around and going back over those miles haunted him like a fresh nightmare. He had spent years staying away from that area when he could. Whenever a route suggested it, he asked for another assignment, gave some excuse about traffic, road conditions, anything. He had built a lifestyle around not looking backward. I have a delivery time, Lucas muttered weakly, clinging to the only shield he still had. They're expecting this freight in the morning. They'll wait, Daniel said, or they'll get someone else next time. You know how this works. Trucks break, routes change. But if you don't make this trip now, when will you? You think you'll live forever? You think the road will keep you running away forever? Lucas's lips pressed into a hard line. His chest ached. His hands felt numb around the wheel. He thought about all the other nights, all the other ghostly passengers, about the way their faces lingered in his mind, the way their stories clung to his thoughts whenever he tried to sleep. He thought about the woman who walked through the cemetery gate, the man swallowed by fog, the boy in a soccer jersey talking about his mother yelling at a body that wouldn't wake up. Maybe he owed it to them too. Maybe he owed it to himself. You're sure it's still there? He asked eventually, voice flat with exhaustion. The curve, the cross, the place. You think they would have fixed that guardrail properly? Daniel murmured with a sadness that sounded almost amused. Of course it's still there. The world doesn't patch up its scars as quickly as you think. Lucas blew out a slow breath. He reached for the indicator, changed lanes when the mirror showed him nothing but darkness, and took the next exit that would let him turn around, back in the direction he'd come from. The decision settled over him like a heavy jacket. Uncomfortable, but also strangely right. like something he should have put on a long time ago. You know, Daniel said after a while as the road curved gently and the rain eased a little, you've been carrying people like me for a long time. Did you really never notice before that night at the cemetery? I noticed strange things, Lucas admitted. I noticed people saying weird stuff. I noticed drop-off points that didn't make sense. But I always told myself I was tired, that I was mishearing things, that my eyes were playing tricks on me. It was easier than this. Easier than admitting that the road holds more than just cars and trucks, Daniel said. Easier than admitting you weren't just running freight. You were running from yourself. Lucas didn't argue. The silence between them wasn't empty now. It was full, of years unsaid, of apologies unspoken, of time broken into miles instead of days. Did you hate me? He asked suddenly. The question came out before he could stop it, as if it had been trapped behind his teeth for years and finally found a crack to escape. Daniel didn't answer right away. Lucas felt every second stretch like a rubber band about to snap. Sometimes, Daniel said honestly, sometimes I hated that you weren't there. Sometimes I hated that. When I looked out at the road, one of the trucks could be yours, but it never stopped in front of our building unless it was planned weeks before. Sometimes I hated that when you did show up, you were so tired, you fell asleep and said you'd play later, and then later never came. The words cut, but Lucas didn't flinch away from them. He stared straight ahead, jaw tight. And now? He asked. Now that you're this, whatever this is, do you still hate me? Sometimes, Daniel said again, but it's not the same. Hate is heavy. It keeps you stuck. I've been stuck long enough. I don't want to carry that forever. He paused, then added softly, I wanted to see you. That's heavier than hate. That's what pulled me here. Lucas's eyes burned. The road blurred for a moment, and he had to blink hard to clear it. Your mother, he said, grasping at the one thing left that could anchor him. Does she know you're... She knows I'm gone, Daniel said quietly. But she still sets a plate for me sometimes when she's really tired. She still talks to my room when she walks past. She pretends she's talking to herself, but she's not. You're not the only one who drives circles around what happened, Dad. She lives with it parked in her hallway. The curve where the accident had happened was still a long way ahead, but Lucas could already feel it looming in his mind like the mouth of a tunnel. The rain came and went in waves. Every time it thickened, his shoulders tensed. Every time it lightened, he wondered if that was a sign or just weather doing what weather does. The others, he said after some time, the ones I picked up, do they move on after they step out of the truck? Or do they just keep walking? Some move on, Daniel said. Some don't. You're not a magician. You can't force anything, but you give them something they didn't have before. A last conversation, a last witness, a last chance to tell someone what happened. That matters. You have no idea how much it matters when everything else has already been taken away. Lucas swallowed hard. What about you? He asked. Will this be enough for you? We'll find out, Daniel answered. We're headed there, aren't we? The miles unspooled behind them. Towns flickered by on either side of the highway. A gas station's neon sign. A lonely diner still open with a bored attendant behind the counter. A motel with curtains half closed and one light on in an upper window. Lucas drove in a kind of daze, muscles working out of habit, eyes scanning the road automatically. His mind was somewhere else entirely, walking backward through years of choices, rewinding every time he had chosen the road over his son, every time he had convinced himself he was doing it for the family, when really he was doing it because it was easier than facing the mess inside the apartment walls. Do you remember? Daniel asked at one point. That day you took me along for a short trip, just between two nearby towns. The memory hit Lucas with surprising clarity. You got carsick, he said. You tried so hard not to admit it because you wanted to impress me. You wanted to be a real trucker like your dad. But halfway there you turned pale and asked me to stop. Daniel chuckled, the sound strangely warm in the cold cabin. You stopped next to a field and I threw up all over the grass, he said. You were mad at first. Then you laughed. You said, well, at least the plants got some extra fertilizer today. Your mother was furious when we got back, Lucas said, the corners of his mouth twitching despite everything. She said I shouldn't have taken you without telling her, said you were too young, said she could smell the vomit on your shoes from the door. Daniel nodded. You promised you'd take me again when I was older and wouldn't get sick, he said. The smile faded from Lucas's face. I remember, he murmured. I never did. That's why this feels like my last ride, Daniel said lightly, though his voice trembled. The one I was supposed to get when I got older. The one where I didn't throw up. The highway sign that marked the approach of the dangerous stretch finally appeared ahead, green letters glowing faintly under the truck's lights. Lucas's heart rate climbed. His palms grew damp. That curve had always made him uneasy, but now he understood why, as if some part of him had known all along, even when he refused to admit it. "You don't have to speed," Daniel said. "We're not reenacting anything. Just get there." Lucas eased up on the accelerator. The truck rolled forward at a steady, cautious pace. Trees leaned close to the roadside here, their branches heavy with rain, dripping onto the asphalt. The guardrail on the right side of the road appeared, running along the edge of the drop. Part of it was still bent, twisted metal stained darker by rust and time, never fully replaced. Beside that torn section, just before the curve inside the hillside, stood a weathered post with a white cross nailed to it. Plastic flowers, once bright, now faded to grayish colors, drooped in a small cluster tied to the wood. Some were newer, their colors still sharp. Others had nearly turned the color of dust. Lucas felt his breath catch. His vision tunneled onto that cross. "There," Daniel said softly. "That's where the car left the road." Lucas signaled, slowed almost to a crawl, and pulled onto a small gravel area just before the curve, the truck's tires crunching over stones. He switched on the hazard lights. The night around them felt unnaturally quiet now, the rain reduced to a light drizzle, almost a mist. The engine's rumble seemed too loud in the stillness. He left it idling, unable to bear the thought of turning it off, as if the truck's heartbeat was the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. "You really want me to get out?" he asked. His voice sounded weak, like it belonged to someone much older. "I've spent enough time out there for both of us," Daniel answered. "It's your turn. I'll be right here." The idea of leaving his son in the cabin while he went to that cross felt wrong, backward, but he understood what Daniel meant. This was his pilgrimage. The road had given him a million excuses to keep moving. It was time he stopped. Lucas swallowed hard, unbuckled his belt, and pushed the door open. Night air slapped his face, cool and damp. It smelled of wet earth, asphalt, and a faint trace of flowers, both real and plastic. The hazard lights clicked on and off, bathing the side of the truck in pulses of orange. His boots crunched on gravel as he stepped down and closed the door. For a moment, he just stood there, one hand on the truck's handle, eyes locked on that cross. It was smaller up close than it had looked from the road, but it carried a weight that pressed against his chest like a physical force. He took a step toward it, then another. The closer he got, the clearer the chipped paint appeared, the faint pen marks where someone had written initials, and a date he refused to really read, his brain skipping over the numbers like stones over water. He didn't need to see them. He already knew what they meant. When he reached the post, he stood there for a long moment, unsure what to do with his hands. He wanted to touch it, but it felt like intruding on something sacred, something that belonged to his ex-wife and her grief, not to him, the man who had stayed away. "Go on," Daniel's voice said behind him. For a second, Lucas panicked, spinning around, expecting to see the boy standing in the gravel. The road was empty. The truck glowed in its hazard light rhythm, engine humming. The passenger seat was just a dark shape through the side window. The voice had come from inside Lucas's head, or maybe from the space between one raindrop and the next. He turned back to the cross. He reached out and placed his hand on the wood. It was damp and rough under his palm. The plastic flowers rustled softly in the breeze, still dripping water. "I'm sorry," he said. The words came out in a rush, the dam finally breaking. "I'm so damn sorry, Daniel. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I'm sorry I chose the road again and again when I should have chosen you. I'm sorry I let anger and pride and work and everything else get in the way. I thought I'd have more time. I thought there'd always be another route where you'd be older and I'd do better." His voice cracked. He pressed his forehead against the cross, the wet wood cooling his skin. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I don't deserve to stand here and say any of this. But if you've been waiting here for me, if anything I say can help you move on from this place, then please, hear me now. I should have been your home, not this roadside." Wind moved through the trees above, carrying a low whispering sound, as if 1,000 voices had just drawn breath at once. Behind him the road remained empty, the drizzle misting in the headlights. "You always made everything about driving," Daniel's voice said softly near his shoulder, though when Lucas glanced sideways, he still saw no one. "Every story, every plan, every excuse. You said you'd catch the next exit when it came to being a father. But you never did. I know, Lucas whispered. Tears slid down his cheeks, mixing with the rain. I know. I thought if I just kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel how much I'd messed up. It was cowardly. I know that now. I've known for a long time, but didn't want to say it. You can't turn around all those miles, Daniel said. They're gone. But you can stop pretending they didn't happen. You can stop running from this curve. This is where my road ended. It's where yours has to change. Lucas's hand tightened around the cross. What do you want me to do? He asked again, voice trembling. Let me go, Daniel said. Stop carrying me like freight chained to your bumper. Stop visiting me in your nightmares and then waking up and doing nothing different. Let me be what I am, a boy whose story ended here, not a ghost you keep dragging from shoulder to shoulder. Lucas drew in a shaky breath. How? Say goodbye, Daniel said simply. Mean it. Then go back to the truck and stop picking up passengers unless you're ready to really listen. Not just to their stories, but to what they're asking of you. Because you're not just a driver anymore, Dad. Like it or not, you're something else too. Lucas closed his eyes. He thought about his son as a baby, tiny fingers curling around his thumb. As a toddler, running awkwardly after a toy truck on the floor. As a kid, standing on a balcony, waiting for headlights. He thought about all the routes he'd chosen instead of birthdays, all the sense he'd pretended it made, all the lies that had felt comfortable at the time. Goodbye, Daniel, he whispered, the words tearing out of him. I love you. I loved you then, even when I didn't know how to show it. I love you now. I'm sorry I'm saying it to a piece of wood on the side of the road instead of to your face, but it's all I have left. Goodbye, son. The wind shivered through the trees again, this time softer. The rain eased to almost nothing, just a faint coolness on his skin. For a moment, the world grew so quiet that Lucas could hear his own heartbeat clearly. Something inside him loosened, a knot that had been there for so long he'd forgotten what it felt like not to carry it. It didn't vanish entirely, nothing that big does, but it shifted, no longer choking him the way it had. He stood like that for a while, hand on the cross, forehead resting against the damp wood. Then he straightened, took a step back, and wiped his face with the back of his hand. When he turned toward the truck, he half expected to see Daniel standing there in the gravel, waving like he had that day near the field. The space next to the truck was empty. The cabin light flicked on as he opened the driver's door. He paused, eyes drawn to the passenger seat. It was dry. No watermarks, no damp patch where a soaked hoodie had been, no muddy footprints on the floor mat. But there, on the seat, resting right in the center, was a small toy truck. Old, the paint chipped on the edges, one of the wheels slightly bent, one of the cheap models he used to buy at gas stations. Lucas stared at it. His chest ached, then warmed. Slowly, with hands that shook despite the calm in the air, he picked it up. It felt solid, real, heavy for its size. He closed his fingers around it like it was the most precious freight he had ever carried. Thank you, he whispered, not sure if he was speaking to Daniel, to the road, or to something else entirely. Thank you for still getting in the truck with me, even after everything. He slipped the toy into a small compartment above the dashboard, where he kept a few personal items, an old photograph, a worn keychain, a crumpled receipt from a diner that had closed years ago. The toy truck fit between them like it had always been meant to be there. When he sat down and closed the door, the cabin felt different, lighter somehow. Not empty, never empty, but not crowded with unspoken things anymore. The engine's rumble was still there. The smell of diesel and coffee and plastic still wrapped around him, but the air felt clearer. He took the truck out of neutral, turned off the hazard lights, and eased back onto the road, driving past the twisted guardrail and the cross. As the curve slipped beneath his tires, the usual tightening in his chest softened. The ache was still there, but it had changed shape. It was no longer just guilt and fear. It was also love and loss laid bare, finally acknowledged. He drove on, the night unfolding ahead of him. The rain had stopped completely now. Clouds parted in broken patches, revealing pieces of a pale sky beyond. Towns would come and go. Freight would be delivered or delayed. The company would complain or shrug and adjust. Life on the road would keep happening, because it always does. But something fundamental had shifted. He knew that the next time he saw a figure on the shoulder, standing in the glow of his headlights with their arm raised, he would stop with his eyes open, not pretending anymore, not lying to himself about what he was doing. He would listen to their story, truly listen, and understand that sometimes the cargo wasn't just in the trailer behind him. Sometimes it sat right next to him, asking for a ride to some place that wasn't on any map. As for Daniel, he didn't know exactly where his son was now. He didn't know if the boy had moved on to some place of rest, or if he lingered a little longer in the spaces between headlights and shadows. But for the first time since that terrible call, Lucas felt like he'd finally shown up, like he'd finally made one trip that wasn't about running away, but about turning back and facing what waited for him in the dark. On the passenger side, the seat remained empty. The toy truck in the overhead compartment rattled once with the motion of the road, as if a small hand had brushed it on the way out. Lucas smiled through the lingering tears. He fixed his eyes on the stretch of highway ahead, hands steady on the wheel, and drove into the rest of the night, no longer alone with his ghosts, but walking alongside them, 1 mile at a time. But the road wasn't done with him. For a while, things actually felt quieter. The first weeks after that night at the curve were almost normal, at least on the surface. Lucas drove his routes, signed his receipts, drank burnt coffee at the same counters, nodded to the same attendants at the same gas stations. He slept badly, sure, but he had always slept badly. The difference now was that when he closed his eyes, he wasn't just running away from blurry shapes anymore. He was seeing Daniel's face, clear, close, looking at him from the passenger seat with that mixture of softness and hurt that only a child who has known both love and disappointment can wear. He thought that by going back there, by touching the cross and saying goodbye, he'd closed some door he had no idea he'd opened. It felt like that for a time. No more passengers who slipped through gates or disappeared into fog. No more drop-off requests at cemeteries and broken bridges. A few nights in a row, the shoulder of the road stayed empty. The highway just a long, cold river of asphalt and light. But nothing stays empty for long on the road. And if there's one thing Lucas should have learned by then, it's that balance always finds a way to correct itself. The first sign that things weren't finished came one night when he was parked at a rest area. Engine off, cab dark, trying to grab a few hours of sleep before the next leg. He had the curtain pulled halfway shut, the sound of distant trucks idling like the breathing of some giant animal outside. He drifted in and out, that strange half-sleep truckers know too well, where the line between dream and memory is paper-thin. Somewhere in that drifting state, he heard footsteps on the gravel, crunching slowly toward his truck. Not unusual by itself. Drivers wander around, stretch their legs, smoke, use the bathroom. But these footsteps were clean, too clean. No echo from the nearby trailers, no shift in the air or shadow across the curtain. Just the dry, crisp sound of soles grinding tiny stones one by one. They stopped right under his window. Lucas held his breath without realizing it, listening. Then something tapped against the glass. Not a hand, not knuckles. It was a light, metallic tap, the sound of something small and hard striking the window once, twice, 3 times with patient regularity. He turned slowly, heart pounding against his ribs, and stared at the dark rectangle of the window over his bunk. The curtain was drawn across it, but the fabric was thin enough that if someone had been standing outside with a flashlight or under one of the big lamps, he would have seen their silhouette. There was nothing, just the blackness and that patient ticking sound, like a coin or a ring tapping the glass in a waiting rhythm. He reached for the curtain, then froze. Even with the engine off, even in that dense silence, he heard it, a whisper. Not from outside, from inside the cab. It came from somewhere near the passenger seat, soft and layered, as if several voices were speaking at once in a language he almost understood. He couldn't make out words, just the cadence. Pleading, urgent, tired. His skin crawled. Every instinct in him screamed not to move, not to answer, not to acknowledge. He stayed as still as he could, hand hovering inches from the curtain. "You wanted to listen, remember?" A voice like Daniel's whispered in the back of his mind. "You said you'd listen next time." The tapping on the glass stopped. The whispers in the cab faded like breath on a mirror. When Lucas finally forced himself to yank the curtain open, the window showed nothing but his own reflection and a slice of the parking lot beyond. No one stood outside. No footprints in the thin film of dust on the step. Just the faint outline of his own face, pale and drawn, eyes too wide. He slept with the cab light on that night, and the ones that followed. After that, the road began to show its teeth again. It started small, silhouettes that appeared in his mirrors and vanished when he looked directly. Flickers in the back of the cab when he knew he was alone. The radio tuning itself without his hand on the dial. switching from music to a dead channel, then to static, then to a voice buried under the noise, repeating the same word or phrase over and over until he shut it off. Once, passing under an overpass in the small hours, he caught a glimpse of someone standing on the railing above, arms spread, leaning forward like they were about to jump. He braked hard, heart hammering, but by the time he'd checked his mirrors and come out the other side, there was no one up there, just empty concrete and a flickering light. The worst part wasn't seeing these things. The worst part was that, now that he'd accepted what he was, he couldn't pretend any of it was just tiredness or tricks of the eye. These were not hallucinations. They belonged to the same fabric of whatever had let Daniel sit beside him and talk. The road had noticed that he'd noticed, and it wasn't going to let him go back to sleepwalking through night shifts. The real breaking point came a few months later. On a night so foggy the world beyond the beams of his headlights looked like the inside of a breath. He was on a stretch of highway he didn't normally take, a detour the company had requested because of some blocked route further up. The GPS kept flashing warnings about low visibility. Signs along the roadside told drivers to reduce speed, but most of the traffic had already thinned. Normal people weren't out here at that hour, only trucks and the occasional desperate car. Lucas drove carefully, hands firm on the wheel, eyes flicking between the windshield and the mirrors. The fog wasn't natural. He knew fog. This was thicker, denser, clinging to the truck like fingers. It rolled in waves across the asphalt, sometimes opening just enough to show a few meters of road, then closing in again like a curtain. The world beyond the glass felt very far away and very close at the same time, as if he could stretch his hand out and touch something he didn't want to feel. As he approached a long, straight section before a bridge, the CB radio crackled. He hadn't touched it in weeks. Most drivers used their phones now, or apps, or just stayed silent. The CB was mostly dead air and the occasional old-timer. Tonight, though, a voice came through clear, cutting through static. "Unit 12, you picking this up?" The voice sounded wrong from the first word, flat and breathless at the same time. Lucas glanced at the radio, then at the small sticker above it that showed his unit number. 12. Nobody had used that call sign in ages. "Who is this?" he asked before he could stop himself. His own voice sounded thin in the cabin. 12, you got eyes on that mess ahead?" the voice asked, ignoring the question. "Fog's thick, but they're all over the road. Some still moving, some not." Lucas's grip tightened. "What mess?" he asked. "What are you talking about?" "Pile up," the voice said. "Multiple vehicles. Some of them didn't even hit the brakes. You better slow down, 12. You don't want to end up part of that heap." Lucas's heart rate spiked. He eased off the accelerator even more, letting the truck roll forward. "Where?" he asked. "How far?" "You'll feel it," the voice replied. "You'll feel when you're close. They're all calling at once. Hard to make out just one." The static surged, swallowing the voice for a moment. When it dropped again, something else came through, a chorus of sounds, layered and overlapping, crying, shouting, a child screaming, a man swearing, a woman praying under her breath. The sounds weren't clear enough to be coming from any one location. They felt like echoes inside the frequency, bouncing off the inside of Lucas's skull. He reached for the CB to shut it off. Before his fingers touched the knob, another voice squeezed out of the static, one he knew instantly, even though it was quieter and older than before. "Dad." Lucas froze. He didn't need to ask who it was. "You shouldn't be on this road," Daniel's voice whispered through the crackle. "But you are, so now you have to finish what you started." "I already did," Lucas whispered back, throat tight. "I went to the curve. I said goodbye. I let you go. You let me go," Daniel agreed softly. "But you opened something bigger than me. All those rides you gave before, all those stories you listened to halfway. You think you can just close that door? You're not the only one who needed to be heard." The fog thickened, swallowing the beams of his headlights so completely that the road ahead looked like a blank wall. Lucas started to slow almost to a crawl, hazard lights blinking on automatically as he hit the switch. The air inside the cab grew colder. His breath misted in front of his face. "What do you want from me?" he asked, barely able to breathe. "There's a pile up ahead," Daniel's voice said, steady as if he were sitting in the seat again. "You're going to be the first one to reach it, or the last. Depends on how you look at it. Some of them are already gone. Some are stuck between. Some are still screaming and don't know why they can't hear themselves. They're all pouring into the same place. You opened a route for them, Dad. You made your truck into a link. Now they're using it." "I can't help them all," Lucas said. I'm just one man driving a truck. You don't have to help all of them, Daniel said. You just have to drive like you did for me. You have to show up. The CB went dead. Silence filled the cab, heavier than any noise. The only sounds left were the low growl of the engine, the hiss of the heater, and the soft drag of the wipers across the useless sheet of white. Then, under all of that, something else began, a faint rhythmic thumping from the rear of the truck. At first, Lucas thought it was the freight shifting in the trailer, maybe a loose strap knocking against metal. Then the thumps multiplied. They came from different heights, different spots along the trailer's length, like hands pounding from the inside. One set high up, as if someone taller than him was banging on the wall. Another low to the ground, fast and panicked. Then more, up and down the sides, on the very back doors, on the roof above his head. Bang, 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 bang. The sound rose in a frantic chorus. The fog turned the world outside into a blank canvas, but inside the truck, something invisible pressed in from every direction. Lucas's throat went dry. He wanted to pull over, throw the doors open and run, but where would he go? The fog didn't just sit on the road. It clung to everything. Leaving the cab would be like stepping into cotton soaked with cold hands. Instead, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He gripped the wheel, fixed his eyes on the faint suggestion of lane markings beneath his headlights, and kept driving. As he crept forward, shapes began to emerge from the white. Not clearly, never fully, just impressions. To his right, a dark mass that might have been a truck lying on its side. Trailer twisted, wheels pointing uselessly at the sky. To his left, the ghost of a car, front crushed, windshield a spiderweb of cracks. Between them, more shapes, smaller and larger, some still sparking with the occasional flash of hazard lights, others already dead metal. The thumping on his trailer grew more urgent. Through the fog, figures flickered. A woman stumbling in the median, hands outstretched, clothes drenched in blood that didn't show any color in the pale light, just darker patches. A man crawling on hands and knees along the shoulder, leaving a smear behind him that the fog immediately swallowed. A kid standing in the middle of the lane, arms raised as if to block the truck, eyes wide. Lucas flinched and hit the brakes, hard in his throat. The truck slowed to a stop, but the boy didn't move. Then, as Lucas blinked, the figure wasn't there anymore. Just fog and the faint outline of a broken guardrail somewhere ahead. The pounding on the trailer walls didn't stop. It shifted, migrated, concentrated toward the front, as if whatever was trapped in the back now knew he was stopped and wanted him to move, to keep going. The cab filled with sounds that weren't really sounds. Choked sobs, swallowed screams, the crunch of metal repeating in short bursts, over and over like the moment of impact was happening again and again inside the steel box he was pulling. "You have to move, Dad," Daniel's voice said, not from the CB this time, but from somewhere directly behind his seat. Lucas didn't turn. He couldn't. He stared straight ahead, fingers white on the wheel. "If you stay still, they'll stay with you," Daniel continued. "If you move, you give them a chance to leave this stretch. Your truck isn't just hauling food or parts tonight. It's hauling the moment between their last breath and whatever comes next." "What if I crash too?" Lucas whispered. "What if this is how my road ends?" "Then you keep driving somewhere else," Daniel said. "You think the road stops just because the asphalt does?" Outside, the fog pulsed, thinning and thickening in slow breaths. Somewhere to the right, a car horn stuck in a permanent blare finally cut off mid-note, leaving an ugly silence in its place. The air smelled like burnt rubber, hot metal, and something coppery just beneath that. Lucas's stomach churned. He thought of all the times he had passed pile-ups after the fact, when the ambulances were already gone, and the only things left were skid marks and bent rails and flowers that would show up a day later. Now he was here in the middle of one, except it felt like it was happening in slow motion and all at once and not at all anymore. With effort, he took his foot off the brake and pressed gently on the accelerator. The truck lurched forward, moving inch by cautious inch between the hulks of crashed vehicles. As he passed them, the shapes inside became clearer. In one car, a man still strapped to the wheel turned his head slowly, following the truck with eyes that glowed faintly in the headlights, though his chest didn't move. In another, a woman reached through shattered glass, hand stretching farther than it should, fingers brushing the empty air just inches from his window. In his side mirror, Lucas saw them in the truck's wake. Figures stepping out of their ruined vehicles, out of shredded metal and broken glass, stumbling after the trailer. Some climbed onto invisible steps, pulling themselves up nothing. their hands scraping along air that gave way like a curtain. Then, as their bodies crossed an invisible line near the trailer's doors, they blurred and vanished, leaving only the dent of their palms in his memory. The pounding on the trailer walls changed. It wasn't frantic now. It was rhythmic, like a heartbeat, like the sound of fists knocking from inside a coffin, not because they wanted to escape, but because they wanted to be sure someone heard them before they settled down. Lucas felt the weight on the truck increase, not in the way the engine responded. Mechanically, the freight was the same, but in his bones. It was as if each soul that clambered aboard leaned against his spine for a second on the way through. "Keep going," Daniel urged quietly. "Don't stop until the fog breaks." Lucas obeyed. He drove through that white tunnel of wreckage and lost time, engine low and steady, trailer creaking around its new, invisible load. Sometimes, for a second, faces appeared beside his window, pressed to glass that had no condensation, mouths moving in silent words of thanks or curses he'd never hear. Sometimes he glimpsed shapes in the passenger seat, blinking in and out. The woman from the cemetery, hands folded over her bag, the man with the briefcase, the boy in the soccer jersey humming a tune under his breath. They weren't solid. They were reflections caught between worlds, glancing off him as they passed. He kept his eyes on the road. Finally, after what felt like hours but might have been minutes, the fog began to thin. It didn't fade gradually like natural mist. It broke, ripped apart in front of the truck like cotton being torn. One moment, he was surrounded by white and the endless echo of banging fists. The next, he burst out into clearer air, night sky visible above, stars dim behind high clouds. In the mirrors, the fog hung behind him in a thick wall, swallowing the ruined vehicles from sight. The pounding on the trailer ceased all at once. The silence that followed was deafening. Lucas eased the truck onto the shoulder, heart racing, and turned on the hazard lights again. His hand shook as he shifted into neutral. He sat there for long seconds, just breathing, lungs burning like he'd run miles. The cab felt empty. Not like before. This emptiness had a different texture. Clean almost. He realized with a start that for the first time in months, he didn't feel like there was someone sitting beside him or in the back of the cab or clinging to the sides of the trailer. The air felt thin and sharp, like after a storm when all the dust has been washed away. "Are they gone?" he asked, not sure who he was talking to. The only answer at first was the ticking of the cooling engine. Then, from the compartment above the dash, something rattled softly. Lucas glanced up. The toy truck had shifted forward, its little wheels bumping against the edge of the shelf. As he watched, it rocked once on its own and then settled. "For now," Daniel's voice said, distant but warm, the way a memory sounds when you replay it in your own head. "You did what you needed to do." "Is it over?" Lucas asked. "All of it? The rides, the passengers, the whatever I turned into?" A long pause followed. He listened to his own heartbeat, the faint hiss of the heater, the occasional car far away in the opposite lane. Just a pair of lights sliding past and gone. "The road never ends, Dad," Daniel said eventually. "Not for people like you. There will always be another night, another curve, another pair of headlights that don't make it to where they're going. But it doesn't have to eat you alive anymore. You know what you are now. You can choose how to carry it. And you?" Lucas whispered. "Where are you?" "Not on the shoulder anymore," Daniel answered. "Not waiting for your truck. I think I'm finally going where I was supposed to go the night the car left the road. You just gave me the ride I needed to get there." Something hot slid down Lucas's cheeks. He didn't bother wiping it away. "Will I ever see you again?" he asked. "Maybe," Daniel said. "But if you do, I hope it's not on the side of a highway. I hope it's somewhere quiet, somewhere we don't have to shout over engines and rain." His voice faded, thinning like mist in sunlight. Before it disappeared completely, one last word reached Lucas, soft and clear. "Goodbye." The compartment above the dash went still. The toy truck didn't move again. Lucas sat there for a long time, watching the distant wall of fog behind him, the empty road ahead, and the quiet sky above. Eventually, he put the truck back in gear, turned off the hazard lights, and merged onto the lane again. He drove in silence until dawn painted a pale line on the horizon. When he finally reached the next town with an open diner, he pulled in and parked among the other trucks. Inside, the smell of bacon and burnt coffee wrapped around him like a blanket. He took a seat at the counter. The waitress, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, set a mug in front of him without asking. "You look like hell, hun," she said. "Long night?" "You have no idea," he answered, voice dry. As he wrapped his hands around the warm mug, two other drivers a few stools down were talking in low voices, glancing toward the window every few seconds. "They say there was a pileup back on the highway," one was saying. "Real bad one. At least 6, 7 cars, maybe a truck. Fog so thick you couldn't see your own hood." "Yeah, but here's the weird part," the other muttered. "I passed that stretch maybe an hour ago. Fog was still there, but no wrecks. Not even skid marks. Just a weird feeling and no sound, like the road was holding its breath. I heard on the radio they're still trying to figure out how so many cars reported the crash if they can't find any debris," the first replied. "Like everybody saw it and then it wasn't there. Crazy, right?" They laughed nervously. The waitress shook her head and said something about people drinking and driving. Lucas stared into his coffee. In his mind, the pounding on the trailer walls echoed once, then faded, like a heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm and moved on. He delivered his freight late that day. The company called, annoyed, and he listened patiently, offered no excuses, and simply said it wouldn't happen again. That was a lie. There would be other nights, other delays he couldn't explain, other times when he'd pull onto a dark shoulder because someone stood there in the glow of his headlights with their arm raised, eyes wide, asking without words for one last ride. He knew now he would stop for them, not blindly, not pretending. He would stop because he had chosen this, because the road had chosen him, and because somewhere along the way, between his failures and his regret, he had become the trucker the dead looked for when they were too scared or too stubborn to walk into the dark on their own. People who drive long distances at night started to talk about him, though they didn't know his name. They spoke of a truck that appears on foggy stretches when things go wrong, hazard lights blinking like a slow heartbeat, engine never roaring, just humming low and steady. They said if you're unlucky enough to crash on some forgotten road between one town and the next, you might hear the growl of his diesel before the sirens ever show up. If you look up through the cracked windshield, you might see him step down from the cab, face lined and eyes tired, but strangely gentle, like a man who has seen too much and is still willing to see more. They said if you sit in his passenger seat, you can talk, really talk, and he'll listen like your story is the only freight he has on board. When he drops you off, well, nobody agrees on where that is. Some say he leaves you by a roadside cross that's not really there. Others say he takes you to the edge of a town you remember from childhood, where the lights are always warm and nobody locks their doors. A few whisper that he leads you back to the scene of your own death, so you can finally look at it, accept it, and move on. And sometimes, just sometimes, drivers on those same highways swear they see something else. A boy in a hoodie sitting in the passenger seat, watching the road with calm, dark eyes. He never looks at them. He only looks ahead. If you're ever out there, alone in the small hours, with the radio low and the world reduced to the tunnel of your headlights, you might think of these stories. You might tell yourself they're just tales drivers tell to pass the time. You might be right. But if you ever come around a curve and see an old truck in front of you, hazard lights blinking slowly in the fog, moving at a steady pace past a place where your gut tells you something terrible almost happened, or did happen, just not to you, do yourself a favor. Don't try to overtake. Don't honk. Don't rush. Stay behind him for a while. Watch the way his brake lights pulse before each bend, how his cab never quite reflects in your headlights the way it should. You might notice, if you're really paying attention, that his trailer casts no shadow in your beams at all. And if, as you follow in that strange, quiet convoy, your radio crackles and you hear a child's voice laughing softly for no reason, or whispering a name that isn't yours in a language you don't quite recognize, don't panic. Just tighten your grip on the wheel, say a silent thanks that you're still among the living, and let the truck ahead of you lead the way until the fog finally breaks. Because somewhere up there in that cab, a man who once ran from everything is still driving, still listening, still paying for his mistakes one soul at a time. And on some nights, when the road is just right and the air smells like rain and old flowers, his son rides with him,